Chinook helicopter's rotors kicked up a blinding storm of dust as it descended onto forward operating base Sentinel. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen sat motionless in the cargo bay, her hands wrapped around her custom M110 sniper rifle like a mother cradling a newborn child. The other passengers, replacements, supplies personnel, and an embedded journalist, had long since given up trying to make conversation with her. She hadn't spoken a word during the entire 2-hour flight from Bagram. When the ramp dropped, Maya was the first one off, moving with practiced efficiency despite the weight of her gear and the rifle she refused to sling across her back. She carried it at the ready, barrel down but gripped in both hands, eyes scanning the perimeter even though they were inside the wire, surrounded by concrete barriers and guard towers. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood waiting near the landing zone, his uniform dust-stained and faded from 6 months in the Afghan sun. He'd read Maya's file 3 times, increasingly impressed and increasingly concerned with each reading. 128 confirmed kills, Silver Star for Valor in Helmand Province, expert marksman ratings that bordered on supernatural, but also 3 failed psych evaluations that she'd somehow appealed and overturned, a reputation for unconventional behavior, and a note from her previous commanding officer that simply read, "Exceptional soldier, results speak for themselves, be patient with her methods." Staff Sergeant Chen, welcome to FOB Sentinel, Webb extended his hand. Maya shifted her rifle to her left hand, never letting go, and shook briefly with her right. "Sir, where's my bunk assignment?" "I'll have someone show you. First, let me introduce you to." "With respect, Lieutenant, I'd like to get settled and inspect my position before nightfall. We can do introductions during evening chow." Webb blinked at the interruption but nodded. There was something in her eyes, not disrespect, but an intensity that suggested she was operating on a different timeline than everyone else. "Of course, Corporal Kim will show you to the barracks." Corporal Sarah Kim, a combat medic who'd been with the platoon since they deployed, stepped forward with a friendly smile. "This way, Sergeant. We've got you in Building 3 with the rest of the—" She stopped mid-sentence as Maya walked past, rifle still gripped in both hands. Kim exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Webb, who just shrugged. The barracks were typical plywood and sandbag construction, 12 bunks in a room that smelled of sweat, gun oil, and the peculiar dust that got into everything in Afghanistan. Maya's teammates were scattered around, some cleaning weapons, others writing letters home, a few playing cards in the corner. Sergeant First Class Deshaun Miller, the platoon sergeant, stood up from his bunk. He was a bear of a man, 15 years in the Army, with a handshake that could crush walnuts. "You must be our new—" He stopped as Maya walked directly to the bunk that had been prepared for her, dropped her rucksack, and immediately began rearranging the space. She moved her bunk 6 inches to the left, angling it so it faced the northern wall. She tested the sight lines to both exits, and through it all, the rifle never left her hands. Sergeant Chen," Miller tried again. "I'm SFC Miller, platoon sergeant. That's Specialist Rodriguez, Corporal Kim you've met, and—" "Pleased to meet everyone," Maya said without looking up. She was now arranging her gear with meticulous precision, creating zones. Ammunition here, maintenance kit there, hydration system within arm's reach. The rifle lay on her bunk, her hand resting on it even as she worked with the other hand. Rodriguez, a wiry Texan with a perpetual smirk, nudged the soldier next to him. "Is she gonna marry that rifle or what?" The comment was quiet but not quiet enough. Maya's head turned slightly, acknowledging she'd heard, but she said nothing. She simply continued her setup, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Evening came and the team gathered in the chow hall, a larger plywood structure with actual tables and a serving line run by contract workers. Maya entered last, and every eye in the platoon turned to watch. She carried her rifle to the serving line, through the line, to the table. She sat down, placed the rifle across her lap, and began eating with one hand while the other rested on the weapon's stock. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez muttered, loud enough for the table to hear. "She's actually eating one-handed so she doesn't have to put it down." Lieutenant Webb decided to address it directly. "Staff Sergeant Chen, you know the armory here is secure. You can store your weapon there when you're not on duty. It's standard practice." Maya looked up from her tray, her expression calm but unyielding. "With respect, sir, my rifle stays with me. Always. It's not negotiable." The regulation clearly states. "The regulation allows for personal retention of assigned weapons at the commander's discretion, sir. I'm requesting that discretion." Her voice was level, professional, but there was steel underneath. "My rifle is maintained to higher standards than the armory's general inventory. I'm responsible for its readiness, and I take that responsibility seriously." Webb studied her for a long moment. Technically, she was right about the regulation, and pushing the issue on her first day seemed like a battle not worth fighting. "Fine, but it better be secured when you're sleeping." "It will be, sir." What Webb didn't understand, what none of them understood yet, was Maya's definition of secured. To her, that meant in her hands, under her control, within her immediate reach every second of every day. That first night, as the platoon settled into their bunks, Maya lay down fully clothed except for her boots. She positioned herself on her side, the rifle cradled lengthwise against her body, the stock near her face, the barrel pointing toward her feet. Her right arm draped over it possessively. Her eyes closed, but her breathing remained controlled, measured, not the deep rhythm of true sleep. In the bunk across from her, Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. "Man, that is not normal," he whispered to Kim. Kim, more sympathetic, whispered back, "Maybe she's just adjusting. New deployment, new unit, give her time." But Sergeant Miller, lying in his own bunk, wasn't so sure. He'd seen combat stress manifest in 100 different ways. The hypervigilance, the inability to separate from weapons, the constant state of readiness, these were textbook signs. He made a mental note to talk to Lieutenant Webb in the morning about getting Chen evaluated by the behavioral health team. In the darkness, Maya's eyes opened briefly. She felt their concern, their judgment, their whispered doubts. She'd felt it before at her last unit and the unit before that. They always thought she was damaged, paranoid, unable to let go of the war even for a moment. They didn't understand that letting go was how soldiers died. Her fingers traced the familiar contours of her rifle's receiver, finding comfort in the cold metal. Somewhere out in the Afghan night, beyond the wire, beyond the guard towers and lights, enemies were planning. They were always planning, and when they came, not if but when, she would be ready. The fob settled into nighttime quiet, generators humming, distant radio chatter, the occasional footsteps of guards making their rounds. Everyone slept. Everyone except Maya Chen, who lay in the darkness with her rifle, watching, listening, waiting for the danger that always came to those who stopped looking for it. She had learned that lesson in blood 2 years ago. She would never forget it again. The morning sun had barely crested the Hindu Kush mountains when Maya was already awake, though the truth was, she'd never fully slept. She sat on the edge of her bunk, methodically field-stripping her rifle for the morning cleaning ritual. Around her, the platoon stirred groggily, rubbing sleep from their eyes and complaining about the cold. Specialist Rodriguez stumbled toward the latrine, pausing when he saw Maya. Her rifle was completely disassembled on a cleaning mat, each component laid out with surgical precision. "You sleep at all, Sergeant?" "Enough," Maya replied, running a bore brush through the barrel with practiced strokes. Her eyes were clear, alert, not the bleary, exhausted look of someone who'd been awake all night. It was something else, something that made Rodriguez uncomfortable. She looked like a machine that had simply powered down and powered back up, no rest required. By 700 hours, Alpha Company assembled for the daily patrol brief. Lieutenant Webb outlined the route, a movement through 3 nearby villages, standard presence patrol, hearts and minds. Maya would provide overwatch from elevated positions while the main element moved through the valley. But Maya wasn't looking at the patrol route. Her eyes were fixed on a different section of the map entirely, the northern ridgeline that overlooked Fob Sentinel itself. "Something wrong, Sergeant Chen?" Webb asked, noticing her distraction. Maya's finger traced the ridgeline. "What's our coverage on this area, sir? Observation posts, sensors." "That's outside our normal patrol area. Pretty quiet sector. We've got some ground sensors. Camera on Tower 4 gives us partial coverage." "Why?" "Just familiarizing myself with the terrain, sir." But her eyes lingered on those mountains, studying the draws and defiles, the dead spaces where sensors couldn't see. The patrol itself went smoothly. Maya took position on a compound rooftop, her rifle scope sweeping across the village below as the platoon moved through. Then it happened, a brief firefight, nothing unusual for Kunar province. 3 Taliban fighters opened up from a tree line with AK-47s. Maya's response was immediate and clinical. First shot, 823 meters center mass, the lead fighter dropped. Second shot, the shooter attempting to flank left down before he'd taken 3 steps. Third shot, the final insurgent turning to run, fell mid-stride. Total elapsed time, 11 seconds. 3 shots, 3 kills. "Holy shit," Corporal Kim breathed into her radio, watching through binoculars. "Did you see that?" Rodriguez keyed his mic. "Yeah, I saw it. She didn't even hesitate, like shooting targets at the range." When they returned to the FOB that afternoon, Maya's reputation as a shooter was established. But so was her growing strangeness. While the rest of the platoon cleaned weapons and wrote after-action reports, Maya requisitioned a digital camera and returned to Tower 4. For the next 3 hours, she photographed the northern ridgeline. Not random snapshots, but systematic documentation. The same positions at different times of day, tracking how shadows fell, how light reflected off the rocky terrain. She filled a notebook with measurements, angles, distances to various points. Sergeant Miller found her there at sunset, still photographing. "Chen, what the hell are you doing?" "Baseline documentation, Sergeant. If something changes up there, I'll know." "Changes like what?" Maya lowered her camera, looking at him with those unnervingly focused eyes. "Like someone watching us who shouldn't be there." Miller felt a chill despite the warm evening air. "You see something specific?" "Not yet, but I'm looking." That night at dinner, the team's concern escalated into open discussion. Maya sat at the end of the table, rifle across her lap as always, eating mechanically while her eyes constantly scanned the room, exits, windows, fields of fire. "It's getting worse," Rodriguez said quietly to Kim and Miller. "Now she's taking pictures of rocks and writing in that creepy notebook. My cousin had PTSD like this. Couldn't let go of his weapon, thought everyone was an enemy." Kim was more defensive. "She saved our asses today. 3 kills, 3 shots. That's not someone who's losing it." "That's exactly what worries me," Miller interjected. "She's hyper-competent in combat but can't turn it off. Look at her. She's treating the Chow Hall like it's a combat zone." Lieutenant Webb had been listening. He'd also been watching Maya, noting how she positioned herself with her back to the wall, how her free hand never strayed far from her rifle, how her eyes tracked every person who entered or exited. "I'll talk to her again." But before he could, Maya stood abruptly, her attention fixed on something outside the window. She moved to the doorway, staring out into the growing darkness toward the northern perimeter. "Sergeant Chen," Webb followed her. "What is it?" "I don't know, sir. Something felt." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind, probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Later that night, reviewing her photographs on a laptop in the barracks, Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. In 3 separate images taken over the past 2 days, there was a light reflection from the same position on the ridgeline, approximately 1,200 meters out. in an area that should have been completely unoccupied. Scope glint. Someone was up there with optics watching the fob. She cross-referenced the timing with patrol schedules, guard rotations, supply deliveries. Each time there was significant activity at Fob Sentinel, that glint appeared. They were being surveilled systematically, professionally. Maya pulled out a topographical map and began plotting. If she was planning an attack on this fob, where would she position her forces? The northern approach offered concealment in the ravines, dead space from the sensor coverage, and elevated firing positions. It was tactically perfect, and it was exactly where someone was watching from. She checked the lunar calendar on her phone. New moon in 4 days, the darkest night of the month, perfect conditions for an assault. Her hands moved faster now, sketching out probable attack routes, likely breach points, optimal positions for heavy weapons. It all pointed to one conclusion. Fob Sentinel was being prepared for a major attack, and nobody else had noticed. At 200 hours, while the rest of the platoon slept soundly, Maya sat on her bunk, rifle across her knees, staring at her map covered in red markings. She'd seen this pattern before, 2 years ago at a different fob. She'd noticed the signs then too, changed patterns in local movement, unusual observations, the feeling that something was wrong. Then she dismissed it, told herself she was being paranoid, let her guard down for one night, locked her rifle in the armory like regulations said, and tried to sleep like a normal person. 7 of her teammates died that night because she hadn't trusted her instincts. Maya's jaw tight. Not again, never again. She began writing a detailed report, every observation, every photograph, every tactical analysis. By dawn, she had 17 pages of evidence that Fob Sentinel was about to be attacked. The question was, would anyone believe her this time? Corporal Kim woke at 5:30 to find Maya exactly where she'd been at midnight, sitting upright, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on her stack of documents. "Did you sleep at all?" Maya looked up, and Kim saw something haunting in her expression. Not exhaustion, but the terrible clarity of someone who'd seen the future and knew no one would believe her until it was too late. "Sleep is for people who aren't being hunted, Corporal." Kim felt a shiver run down her spine. "What does that mean?" Maya stood, gathering her papers. "It means I need to talk to Lieutenant Webb, right now." Outside, the sun rose over the northern ridgeline, illuminating the rocks and ravines where, unbeknownst to everyone but Maya, enemy scouts were already withdrawing to report back to their commanders. The American fob was ready. The attack could proceed as planned. The hunters had no idea that one of the hunted was hunting them back. Lieutenant Webb's office was barely more than a plywood cubicle with a folding table serving as a desk. He looked up from his morning coffee to find Maya standing in the doorway at 5:45 hours, her rifle slung across her back, a thick folder clutched in her hands. "Sergeant Chen, it's not even 600, this better be important." "Sir, Fob Sentinel is going to be attacked, probably within the next 72 hours. She stepped forward and spread her documentation across his desk, photographs, annotated maps, timeline analyses, pattern assessments. Webb set down his coffee and leaned forward, his initial irritation shifting to concern. Maya walked him through everything. The systematic scope glints from the northern ridgeline, always appearing during high-activity periods. The changed behavior in the local villages, children suddenly absent from areas they normally played, shepherds rerouting their flocks away from traditional grazing areas closest to the fob. "These villages have been using the same routes for generations, sir. 3 days ago they stopped. That's not random." Her finger traced the map. "And here, this compound was occupied by an extended family. I counted 17 people during our patrol last week. Yesterday I counted 4. Everyone of fighting age is gone." Webb studied the photographs. The scope glints were subtle, easy to dismiss as random reflections, but Maya had documented them appearing from the exact same position at different times. This could be sunlight hitting rocks. At 4:30 hours, sir. Maya pulled out another photo, timestamped before dawn. A faint pinpoint of light in the darkness. That's artificial light. Someone with night vision or a thermal scope. Or a shepherd with a flashlight. No shepherd sits in the same position for 3-hour intervals watching a military base, Lieutenant. That's reconnaissance. Webb wanted to believe her. The evidence was compelling. But he'd also seen soldiers become paranoid after too many deployments, finding threats in every shadow. What else? Maya showed him radio intercept summaries from the intelligence shop. Taliban chatter in this valley increased 40% over the past week. Nothing specific, but the pattern matches pre-attack communications, increased coordination, equipment movements, leadership consultations. Intelligence hasn't flagged this as unusual. Because they're looking for specific keywords and known enemy frequencies, sir. I'm looking at behavioral patterns. The enemy knows we intercept communications, so they're being vague. But the increase in volume tells the story. Webb sat back, processing. And you think the attack comes when? Maya pointed to the lunar calendar. New moon is in 3 days, darkest night of the month, minimal ambient light, harder for our night vision and thermals to detect movement at range. If I were planning this, that's when I'd hit. Where would they come from? Without hesitation, Maya's finger jabbed the map. Northern approach right here. They've been studying our defensive posture from that ridgeline. They know our sensor coverage has gaps in these ravines. They'll use this wadi for covered approach, breach the perimeter here where Tower 4 and Tower 5 have overlapping blind spots, then push toward the TOC and armory. Classic assault profile, neutralize command and heavy weapons first. The tactical analysis was sound, disturbingly so. Webb found himself half convinced, which made him more cautious. I need to take this to Captain Holloway. Wait here. 20 minutes later, Maya stood before both Webb and Captain Holloway, the FOB commander. Holloway was a by-the-book officer, 3 months from retirement, who'd managed to keep FOB Sentinel relatively quiet during his tenure. He listened to Maya's briefing with increasing skepticism. Sergeant Chen, I appreciate your vigilance, but I can't put this entire FOB on high alert because shepherds changed their routes and you saw some reflections on a hill. Sir, it's more than that. I read your file before you arrived. Holloway's tone wasn't unkind, but it was firm. 3 previous commanders noted your tendency toward hypervigilance. You've been sent to behavioral health 4 times. Maya's jaw tightened. And all 4 times I was cleared for duty, sir. Cleared, yes. But the notes suggest you have difficulty distinguishing between actual threats and perceived threats. You see patterns that may not exist. The patterns exist, Captain. The question is whether anyone will listen before people die. The room went silent. Holloway's eyes narrowed. That's out of line, Sergeant. Webb interjected, trying to de-escalate. Sir, maybe we could increase perimeter security as a precaution. Enhanced observation on the northern approach, additional guard rotations. Holloway considered this. Fine. We'll increase perimeter patrols and add 1 more guard rotation on the northern towers, but I'm not going to full alert status based on this analysis. We'd be jumping at shadows every night if we reacted to every possible threat scenario. Maya's hands clenched into fists. Sir, with respect, this isn't theoretical. I've seen this before. I know what it looks like when. That's enough, Sergeant. Holloway stood, signaling the meeting was over. We'll take reasonable precautions. Your concerns are noted, dismissed. Outside the office, Webb caught up with Maya. Look, I know that wasn't what you wanted to hear. He's wrong, sir. Maya's voice was tight with controlled frustration. In 3 days, maybe less, they're coming. And when they do, the northern perimeter is where they'll hit hardest. I believe you're concerned. I even believe some of your analysis is solid, but you have to understand how this looks. You arrived 6 days ago and immediately started predicting attacks. You won't put down your weapon. You don't sleep. From the outside, this looks like I'm paranoid, unstable, broken. Maya's eyes flashed. I've heard it all before, Lieutenant, right up until the moment I'm proven right and bodies start stacking up. Webb softened his tone. What happened at your last fob? Your file mentions an incident but no details. Maya was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. What happened was I ignored my instincts. I let people convince me I was seeing threats that weren't there, and 7 good soldiers paid for my doubt with their lives. That's not. I slept that night, Lieutenant. Actually slept. My rifle was in the armory where regulations said it should be. I was trying to be normal, trying to fit in, trying not to be the crazy person everyone whispered about. Her voice cracked slightly. When the attack came, I was weaponless, helpless. I survived by playing dead in a pile of my teammates' bodies while the enemy walked past. Webb had no response. The raw pain in her voice was undeniable. Maya composed herself. So yes, sir, I sleep with my rifle. Yes, I see threats everywhere. Because the one time I didn't, everyone I cared about died. I won't make that mistake again. Not ever. She turned and walked away, leaving Webb standing in the dusty pathway between buildings. That afternoon, Sergeant Miller found Maya on the northern perimeter wall, still photographing the ridgeline, still taking notes. He climbed up beside her. LT told me about the meeting. Then you know, nobody believes me. Miller was quiet for a moment, watching her work. You really think they're coming? I don't think, Sergeant, I know. She showed him her latest photographs. Look at this, fresh vehicle tracks in that wadi taken this morning. Someone drove in there recently. No reason for locals to be in that area. It's all rocks and scorpions. Miller studied the image. Could be Taliban moving weapons or personnel into position. Could be, probably is. Maya lowered her camera. But without definitive proof, nobody's going to do anything until it's too late. So what are you going to do? Maya looked at him with those intense, unblinking eyes. What I always do, Sergeant, I'm going to be ready. When they come, and they will come, I'll be in position, rifle in hand, waiting. That's a hell of a way to live, Chen. It's the only way. I know how to keep people alive. That evening, the platoon gathered in the barracks. The tension around Maya had grown palpable. Rodriguez was openly calling her paranoid, while others exchanged concerned looks whenever she sat motionless on her bunk, rifle across her lap, staring at the northern wall like she could see through it. Corporal Kim tried to bridge the gap. Maybe she's right. Maybe we should take extra precautions. She's been here less than a week, and she's got everyone jumping at shadows, Rodriguez countered. Next she'll be telling us the cook is a Taliban spy. Maya heard every word but said nothing. She'd learned that arguing was pointless. People believed what they wanted to believe, saw what they wanted to see. Comfort was easier than vigilance. Doubt was safer than preparation. She checked her rifle again, already perfectly maintained, but the ritual was calming. Her go bag was packed, extra ammunition, medical supplies, water, batteries, everything she'd need for a sustained firefight. It sat at the foot of her bunk, ready to grab in seconds. Lieutenant Webb entered the barracks, clipboard in hand. Listen up. We've got enhanced guard rotations starting tonight. 4-hour shifts instead of 6. Northern towers get an extra set of eyes. Stay alert out there. After he left, Rodriguez muttered, all this because the new girl has nightmares. Maya's eyes never left the northern wall. Not nightmares, specialist, memories, and the people who ignore memories are doomed to create new ones. As darkness fell over Fob Sentinel, most of the soldiers settled into their evening routines, cards, letters home, movies on laptops. Normal life in an abnormal place. But Maya sat in the gathering shadows, her rifle held close, eyes fixed on the northern perimeter. Somewhere beyond that wall, beyond the wire and sensors and guard towers, the enemy was preparing. She could feel it the way animals feel earthquakes coming, a primal certainty that transcended evidence. 72 hours, maybe less. The clock was ticking, and she was the only one who could hear it. Day 8, 1:57 hours. Maya's eyes snapped open in the darkness. She hadn't been fully asleep, she never was, but something had changed in the night air. A subtle shift in the ambient sounds, a feeling in her gut that made every nerve-ending scream danger. Around her the platoon slept soundly. Rodriguez snored softly. Kim's breathing was deep and rhythmic. Even Sergeant Miller, usually a light sleeper, was dead to the world after a grueling day of patrols. Maya sat up slowly, her hand already on her rifle. She'd slept fully clothed, boots loosely laced for quick donning. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, scanning the barracks. Nothing seemed wrong, but every instinct told her otherwise. She checked her watch, 1:58. The new moon hung invisible in the sky, perfect darkness, perfect conditions for an attack. Then she heard it, or rather didn't hear it. The normal background noise of the fob had changed. The distant hum of generators was there, but something else was missing. The periodic radio chatter from the guard towers had gone silent, not completely, just different, clipped, tense. Maya was lacing her boots when she felt it through the floorboards, a distant vibration. Her hands froze. She knew that sensation. Indirect fire incoming. Incoming, she screamed, grabbing her go-bag. The first mortar round hit 3 seconds later. The explosion tore through the night, slamming into the TOC building with devastating precision. Then another, and another. The fob erupted into chaos. Fire alarms shrieking, soldiers shouting, the distinctive crump of 82 mortar rounds walking across the compound. Maya was already moving, rifle in one hand, go-bag in the other, sprinting toward the door as her teammates stumbled awake in confusion. Gear UP, Northern Perimeter, move. Outside was pandemonium. Mortars rained down with terrible accuracy, hitting the motor pool, the armory, the command buildings. This wasn't random harassment fire. This was a precision strike designed to cripple the fob's ability to coordinate defense and respond with heavy weapons. Soldiers poured from barracks, some in full gear, others half-dressed and confused. Officers shouted contradictory orders. Fire teams rushed toward defensive positions, but the mortars had created choke points, forcing everyone to take cover. Maya ran against the flow, toward the northern perimeter. Most soldiers were rushing to the eastern and southern walls where the mortars were concentrated. But Maya knew better. The mortars were misdirection, sound and fury designed to draw attention away from the real attack. She reached the northern defensive position, a reinforced fighting position behind concrete barriers with overlapping fields of fire. Corporal Kim and Specialist Rodriguez were already there, manning a M240 machine gun, both looking toward the eastern sky where mortars were still falling. "What the hell are you doing here?" Rodriguez shouted over the explosions. "The attack's coming from the east." "The mortars are coming from the east," Maya corrected, dropping her go-bag and immediately setting up her rifle on the barrier. "The assault is coming from here, from the north. Right now." "You're crazy, look at the..." "They've been planning this for weeks." Maya's voice cut through like a blade. "The mortars are fixing our attention east while the main assault comes from the one direction we're not watching. It's a textbook diversion." Kim looked uncertain, her hand on her radio. "Should we call it in?" "Do it, but stay here, they're coming." Maya's eye was already pressed to her scope, scanning the darkness beyond the wire. Her night vision revealed the rocky terrain, the wadis, the dead spaces she'd memorized over the past week. Rodriguez grabbed his radio. "Overwatch 1, this is Northern Position 3. We have possible, I repeat, possible enemy activity to our north. Request confirmation." The radio crackled back. "Northern 3, all enemy fire is originating from eastern sectors. Maintain position, but priority is..." The transmission cut off, as another explosion rocked the fob. Maya's breathing slowed, entering the calm state she achieved in combat. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger guard, not the trigger, not yet. She scanned methodically, left to right, using the technique she'd perfected over hundreds of missions. Then she saw it. Movement in the wadi exactly where she'd predicted. Not one fighter, not 10. Dozens of heat signatures moving with tactical precision, using the terrain to mask their approach. Contact north. Maya's voice was ice-cold calm. 50-plus enemy fighters, 900 meters and closing. Kim, get on that radio now and tell them the main assault is hitting our position in approximately 6 minutes. Kim keyed her radio frantically while Rodriguez swung the M240 around, finally seeing what Maya had spotted. Holy shit, she was right. Through her scope, Maya could see them clearly now. A well-organized assault force, moving in fire teams, carrying RPGs, PKM machine guns, and AK-47s. They were less than a kilometer out, advancing confidently toward what they believed would be an undermanned, distracted defensive position. They had no idea Maya Chen was waiting. She identified the lead element, 3 fighters in front, one carrying what looked like a radio, squad leader. Her crosshairs settled on his center mass. Range, 847 meters. Wind, minimal. Elevation, compensated. Kim, how many rounds you got for that 240? 400 linked, plus another 600 in the bag. Make them count. Rodriguez, when I start shooting, you light up everything I'm not hitting. Aim for the heavy weapons teams first, anyone carrying RPGs or machine guns. What about you? Rodriguez asked, his earlier skepticism completely evaporated. Maya's finger moved to the trigger. I'm going to show them what happens when you underestimate a prepared defender. Lieutenant Webb's voice suddenly crackled over Kim's radio. All positions, this is Overwatch 1. Intelligence confirms enemy assault force approaching from northern sector. I say again, north. All available units reinforce northern perimeter immediately. Too late for reinforcements, Maya muttered. They'll be on us in 4 minutes. She raised her voice. Kim, tell the LT we're engaging. Heavy contact imminent. We're holding this position. Sergeant, there's like 60 of them and 3 of us. Maya's eye never left her scope. Then we'd better make every shot count. The Taliban fighters were 600 meters out now, emerging from the wadi into the open ground before the wire. They were moving faster, sensing they were close to the perimeter. In their minds, the battle was already won. The defenders were pinned down by mortars. Command was disrupted. Resistance would be minimal. Maya's crosshairs settled on the lead fighter. She controlled her breathing, heartbeat steady. The world narrowed to the space between her and the target. At exactly 2:09 hours, FOB Sentinel's motion sensors screamed their alert, multiple contacts, northern perimeter. The computer display in the TOC showed what looked like a red wave of enemy signatures. But the sensors were already obsolete. Maya had seen them first. Her finger pressed the trigger. The M110 barked, and 600 meters away, the Taliban squad leader collapsed, dead before his body hit the ground. Maya was already transitioning to her second target, one of 2 fighters carrying a recoilless rifle that could punch through the FOB's defenses. Second shot, second kill. The Taliban fighters froze for a critical second, confused by the sudden, precise fire from a position they'd been told would be lightly defended. That second of hesitation cost them. Maya's third shot dropped the second recoilless rifle operator. Rodriguez opened up with the M240, tracers arcing into the darkness. Kim was on the radio, giving rapid updates to Lieutenant Webb, her voice steady despite the terror. The enemy assault, so carefully planned, so perfectly timed, suddenly met an immovable obstacle. One soldier who had refused to be surprised, who had prepared for this exact moment, who had been waiting with the patience of a predator. Maya cycled her bolt, acquired her fourth target, and pressed the trigger again. The longest night of their lives had begun, but for the Taliban fighters advancing on Fob Sentinel, it was about to become their last. Behind Maya, Sergeant Miller arrived with a fire team, diving into the fighting position. He took one look at the scene, enemy fighters advancing, Maya shooting with mechanical precision, bodies already littering the approach, and his eyes went wide. "You tried to tell us," he said, almost to himself. Maya didn't respond. She was already lining up her next shot. The battle for Fob Sentinel had begun, and the only thing standing between survival and catastrophe was a woman everyone thought was crazy, holding the rifle she'd refused to put down. Maya had become something beyond human, a weapon system operating at maximum efficiency. Her world contracted to a simple cycle: breathe, acquire, squeeze, follow through, cycle, bolt, acquire, next target. Repeat. Everything else ceased to exist. Shot 5. A fighter attempting to set up a PKM machine gun, down at 580 meters. Shot 6. A Taliban officer shouting orders, trying to reorganize his confused fighters, down at 623 meters. Shot 7. An RPG gunner raising his launcher toward the fob. Down before he could fire, the rocket-propelled grenade tumbling harmlessly into the dirt as his body crumpled. The enemy force had expected to breach the northern perimeter within minutes, overwhelm the few defenders, and pour into the fob like a flood. Instead, they were being systematically destroyed by fire so accurate it seemed impossible. "She's not missing," Rodriguez screamed over the roar of his M240, watching through his optics as another Taliban fighter dropped. "Not a single goddamn shot. How is she not missing?" Corporal Kim fed Maya another magazine, her third. 20 rounds gone, 20 enemies down. The mathematics of death were simple and terrible. "Sergeant, you've got more fighters flanking left, trying to use that rock formation for cover." Maya's rifle swung left with fluid precision. She'd studied that rock formation, knew exactly how much of a human silhouette would be exposed when someone tried to use it for concealment. She led her target by 18 inches, accounting for his movement. Shot 8. The lead flanker pitched backward, the 7.62 round finding the gap between the rocks. Shot 9. His companion, frozen in shock, died before he could process what happened. Shot 10. The third man in the flanking element turning to run made it 3 steps. Sergeant Miller's fire team had set up on Maya's right, adding their rifles to the defense. But even they could see that this fight belonged to one person. Maya had become death itself, precise and unstoppable. A squad of Taliban fighters tried to rush the wire. Hopping speed and numbers would overwhelm the defenders. It was a brave attempt and a fatal mistake. Maya dropped the first 3 in rapid succession. Crack, 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 her rifle speaking with mechanical regularity. Rodriguez's machine gun tore through the next wave, red tracers finding flesh and bone. The assault stalled, then broke, then reversed. "They're pulling back," Miller shouted, watching enemy fighters scrambling for cover, dragging wounded, abandoning equipment. "Negative," Maya's voice was eerily calm. "They're reorganizing. They'll try again from a different angle. Watch the right flank, they'll probe there next." She was right. 2 minutes later, a fresh group of fighters emerged from a ravine on the right side of the defensive position, trying to exploit what they assumed was a blind spot. Maya had been watching that ravine for 6 days, knew its every contour, had range cards prepared for every possible firing position. Shot 15, the pointman dropped. Shot 16, the squad's machine gunner trying to set up a support position. Shot 17, another RPG gunner. Maya had made them priority targets, eliminating the enemy's ability to suppress her position with area fire. Lieutenant Webb arrived with more reinforcements, sliding into the fighting position beside Maya. His eyes were wide with something between awe and disbelief. "Chen, where did you learn to shoot like this?" Maya didn't take her eye from the scope. "Pain is an excellent teacher, sir. Target your 2 o'clock, 650 meters attempting to flank." Webb looked through his own optic, saw the fighter Maya had identified, watched as her bullet found him a second later. Jesus Christ! The Taliban commanders, watching their assault disintegrate, made a desperate decision. They committed their reserve force, a larger element that had been held back for exploiting the initial breach. Approximately 30 fighters surged forward in a coordinated rush, hopping to overwhelm the defenders through sheer volume of fire. It was exactly what Maya had been waiting for. Targets in the open, committed to their assault, unable to quickly retreat to cover. "Kim, tell the LT to get every gun on this wall now. They're making their big push." Maya's shooting became even more systematic. She stopped targeting individual leaders or heavy weapons and simply worked left to right across the advancing line like a farmer harvesting wheat. Each trigger press ended a life. Each bolt cycle chambered another round of judgment. Shot 23, 24, 25. Her shoulder was screaming from recoil. Her cheek was bleeding where the stock had impacted repeatedly. Her trigger finger had a blister forming. None of it mattered. The rifle was an extension of her will, and her will was absolute. None shall pass. More defenders arrived, an entire platoon now reinforcing the northern wall. Machine guns, rifles, even a MK-19 grenade launcher someone had managed to get operational despite the mortar damage. The volume of defensive fire became a symphony of destruction. But through it all, Maya's rifle continued its precise, measured cadence. While others sprayed ammunition in the general direction of the enemy, she made every single round count. In the chaos of battle, she was the eye of the storm, calm, focused, deadly. A Taliban fighter made it to within 200 meters of the wire, closer than anyone else had gotten. He was fast, using cover well, clearly an experienced warrior. He raised his AK-47, and for a moment, Maya saw his face through her scope, young, maybe 20, terrified but committed. She didn't hesitate, couldn't hesitate. Hesitation meant her teammates died. Shot 31 ended his war. Rodriguez had to reload his machine gun for the third time, his barrel glowing red-hot. "How much ammo you got left, Chen?" Maya dropped an empty magazine, slapped in a fresh one. "Enough." The truth was she'd packed 400 rounds in her go bag, double the normal combat load. Everyone had mocked her for it, called it excessive. Now those extra magazines were saving lives. The enemy's coordinated assault had become a rout. Bodies littered the approaches to the northern perimeter. Wounded fighters crawled for cover. The survivors were breaking contact, falling back to the wadis and ravines, their attack completely shattered. But Maya didn't celebrate, didn't relax. Her eye remained pressed to the scope, searching for targets, waiting for the next wave, the next threat. In her experience, enemies didn't give up after one failed assault. They adapted, regrouped, tried again. Corporal Kim was staring at her with something approaching religious awe. "Sergeant, how many do you think you've?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is how many are still out there." Maya shifted her aim to the ravine where she'd first spotted movement. "They've got wounded to recover, commanders to regroup. We've got maybe 20 minutes before they try something else." Lieutenant Webb had been counting, though. He'd watched Maya's shooting, marked each kill he could confirm. The number was staggering, impossible, and yet he'd witnessed it with his own eyes. "Chen," he said quietly, "you just stopped an entire enemy assault force. Alone. For the first 6 minutes before reinforcements arrived, it was just you holding this wall." Maya finally lowered her rifle, her face sheened with sweat despite the cold night air. She looked at Webb, and he saw something in her eyes that made him understand everything. The hypervigilance, the rifle obsession, the constant readiness. This was what she'd been preparing for, this exact moment. Not alone, sir. She gestured to Kim and Rodriguez. They stayed when I needed them. That took courage. Rodriguez, the same man who'd called her crazy 12 hours earlier, shook his head in wonder. You tried to warn us. You told everyone this was coming and we didn't listen. You're listening now, Maya said simply. She pulled out a fresh magazine, checked it, seated it in her rifle. And we're not done yet. They invested too much in this attack to quit after one failure. They'll try again. Sergeant Miller moved beside her, his own rifle at the ready. Then we'll be ready, all of us this time. Maya allowed herself the smallest smile, the first anyone had seen from her since she'd arrived at FOB Sentinel. Now you're learning. The northern perimeter had become a fortress, every fighting position manned, every field of fire covered. The FOB's defenders, initially scattered and confused by the mortar attack, had rallied. Command and control was being restored. The quick reaction force was gearing up for a counterattack. But the core of the defense remained Maya Chen, sitting behind her rifle, eyes scanning the darkness, waiting, always ready. The enemy had learned a hard lesson tonight. FOB Sentinel had a guardian who never slept, never relaxed, never stopped watching. And that guardian was far more dangerous than an entire company of ordinary soldiers. In the temporary lull, Maya performed a functions check on her rifle, her movements automatic from thousands of repetitions. The weapon was holding up perfectly. The obsessive maintenance, the constant care, all vindicated in this moment. Kim offered her a bottle of water. Maya drank without taking her eyes off the northern approaches. Contact, someone shouted from Tower 4. Enemy fighters regrouping in the wadi, looks like there. Maya was already back on her scope, finding the targets, reading their intentions. They're preparing for another push. Different tactics this time. They'll use more dispersion, smaller teams, try to infiltrate rather than assault. How do you know? Miller asked. Maya's finger found the trigger. Because that's what I would do. The night was far from over, but one thing was certain. The enemy had expected to face sleeping soldiers, unprepared and overwhelmed. Instead, they'd found Maya Chen. And that changed everything. The second assault came at 3:27 hours, just as Maya predicted. But this time, the Taliban had changed tactics. Instead of a massed assault, they sent small teams probing different sections of the perimeter, trying to identify weak points, looking for a gap in the defense they could exploit. They found none. Maya directed fire like a conductor leading an orchestra. Rodriguez, 2 fighters, you're 11 o'clock behind that burned-out vehicle. Kim, relay to Tower 5. They've got 4 trying to flank through that irrigation ditch. Her rifle cracked twice more. Miller, heavy weapons team setting up at 800 meters, right side of that boulder. Each observation was precise, each shot purposeful. The enemy's new strategy dissolved under the weight of perfect intelligence and overwhelming firepower. Maya had studied this terrain so thoroughly that she knew where every fighter would try to hide, where every approach route led, where every piece of cover offered false security. By 4:15 hours, the Taliban's second attempt had failed as completely as their first. The firing decreased, then stopped entirely. An eerie silence settled over the battlefield, broken only by the moans of wounded and the crackling of fires started by the initial mortar barrage. Maya remained motionless, eye to her scope, refusing to believe it was over. Her finger rested on the trigger guard, ready, always ready. I think they're done, Webb said, scanning the darkness with his night vision. I'm not seeing any movement. Give it 10 more minutes, sir. Maya's voice was hoarse from shouting commands. If they're really withdrawing, we'll see it in their pattern. If they're baiting us to let our guard down, they'll try one more push. Webb trusted her judgment now. Everyone did. They waited. At 4:23 hours, thermal imaging from the surviving drones showed the enemy force retreating, not in organized units, but in scattered groups, carrying their wounded, abandoning equipment. It was over. Only then did Maya lower her rifle. Her hands were shaking, the first physical sign of stress she'd shown all night. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the battle was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Kim immediately noticed the blood. Maya's right cheek was torn where the rifle stock had impacted repeatedly from recoil. Her shoulder would be a massive bruise, probably a deep tissue injury from the hundreds of rounds she'd fired. "Sergeant, you need a medic." Later, Maya's voice was barely a whisper. She tried to stand and her legs nearly gave out. Miller caught her arm. "Sit down, Chen, you've done enough." For the first time in 8 days, Maya allowed someone else to take her rifle. She handed it to Miller with trembling hands, then sat heavily against the concrete barrier. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, first light coming to reveal the full scope of the battle. Captain Holloway arrived as dawn broke, his face grave. He'd spent the night in the damaged TOC, coordinating the defense, calling for air support and reinforcements. He walked the northern perimeter in silence, counting. The bodies were everywhere. Taliban fighters had fallen at every distance, some as far as 800 meters out, others within 200 meters of the wire. They lay in clusters where Maya's fire had caught them in the open, individually where she'd hunted them through cover, in groups where the combined defensive fire had stopped their assaults cold. An intelligence team was already moving through the battlefield, documenting enemy casualties, collecting weapons and intelligence materials. Their preliminary count was staggering: 34 enemy KIA in the northern sector alone, with blood trails suggesting at least a dozen more wounded who'd been dragged away. The total enemy casualties across all defensive sectors exceeded 50. FOB Sentinels casualties, 3 wounded, none critical. It should have been a massacre of the defenders. Instead, it had become an enemy defeat of historic proportions. Holloway found Maya sitting exactly where Miller had left her, accepting water from Kim but refusing medical attention until everyone else was treated. Her rifle lay across her lap. Even now, she wouldn't be completely separated from it. "How did you know, Sergeant Chen?" Holloway's voice held no skepticism now, only respect and perhaps a trace of shame. "How did you know they were coming?" Maya looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Because I never stopped looking, sir. Everyone else saw a quiet sector. I saw a target being surveilled. Everyone else saw normal village patterns. I saw people preparing for war. Everyone else slept soundly because nothing had happened yet." She paused, her voice cracking slightly. "I couldn't sleep because I knew something was going to happen. Your analysis, the photos, the timeline, everything you showed me 3 days ago, it was all correct." "Yes, sir." Holloway knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. "I should have listened. I let my bias, my assumption that you were being paranoid, override the evidence you presented. That's on me. If you hadn't been prepared anyway, if you hadn't been in position when they came." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Maya nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. She'd been dismissed, doubted, and labeled unstable her entire career. One vindication wouldn't change the pattern. There would be another deployment, another FOB, another set of officers who wouldn't believe until it was too late. Lieutenant Webb approached with a medic. "Chen, that's an order. Get your shoulder and face looked at." This time she didn't argue. The medic examined her shoulder, wincing at the deep bruising. "You've got significant soft tissue damage. This is going to hurt for weeks. How many rounds did you fire?" "Lost count after 150, Maya admitted. The medic shook his head in amazement while cleaning the cut on her cheek. "Your shoulder's going to be purple and black. You should probably be evacuated for proper examination." "Negative," Maya said immediately. "I stay with my unit." Rodriguez approached, carrying something, Maya's expended magazines collected from around her fighting position. He'd counted them. 17 magazines, Sergeant. That's 340 rounds. You fired 340 rounds in about 4 hours of fighting." Sergeant Miller had been doing his own calculation. He'd marked each confirmed kill he could attribute directly to Maya's shooting, cross-referenced with the intelligence team's count and the positions of bodies. The number he arrived at seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. "Chen," he said quietly, pulling her aside as the medic finished. "Best estimate, conservative count, only including kills we can definitively confirm as yours." He paused, still processing it himself. 34 enemy KIA, directly attributable to you alone. In the first phase of the battle before reinforcements arrived, you stopped their main assault single-handedly. Maya closed her eyes. 34 men dead by her hand. 34 families who would receive news of loss. She felt no pride, no satisfaction, just the heavy weight of necessary killing. They would have killed everyone here if they'd gotten through. "I know, we all know. You saved this fob, Chen. You saved all of us." The team began gathering, Rodriguez, Kim, Miller, Webb, even soldiers from other platoons who'd heard what happened. They looked at Maya differently now. The weird new sniper who slept with her rifle, who saw threats in shadows, who couldn't turn off her hypervigilance. She wasn't broken. She was exactly what she needed to be. Kim sat down beside Maya, their shoulders touching in silent camaraderie. "You tried to tell us. 3 days ago, you laid it all out and we didn't listen." "Most people don't," Maya said simply. "Not until the shooting starts." "I'm sorry for doubting you for thinking," Kim trailed off. "Don't be. Doubt is natural. Vigilance isn't." Maya finally allowed herself to fully relax against the barrier. The sun was rising over the mountains now, warm light spilling across the valley. It was beautiful. The same mountains that had hidden enemy fighters now looked peaceful, serene. Rodriguez approached hesitantly. "Sergeant Chen, I owe you an apology. I called you crazy. I made jokes. I thought you were having some kind of breakdown." Maya looked at him steadily. "You weren't wrong to be concerned, Rodriguez. Hypervigilance, inability to sleep, obsessive behavior, those are all symptoms of trauma. The difference is I learned to weaponize my trauma, to channel it into something useful. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone should have to. But you did. Because I had no choice." Maya's hand unconsciously moved to her rifle, fingers tracing familiar contours. This rifle, this constant readiness, it's not about being a hero. It's about never experiencing that helplessness again, never watching people die because I wasn't prepared. Webb joined them, sitting cross-legged on the ground despite his officer status. The formal military hierarchy felt less important after surviving a night like this. "Chen, what happened at your previous fob? Your file mentions an incident, but there are no details." Maya was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun climb higher. Then she began to speak, her voice steady but distant, reliving memories she carried every day. "Fob Katir, Helmand Province 2 years ago. Smaller outpost, 40 soldiers. I was their only sniper. I noticed the same patterns, surveillance, changed local behavior, increased chatter. I reported it. They acknowledged it but didn't act on it." She paused, swallowing hard. "I was off duty the night they attacked. My rifle was locked in the armory. Regulation 64 says weapons must be secured when not in use. I was trying to be normal, trying to fit in. Trying to sleep like everyone else." Her voice cracked slightly. "They hit us at 300. I woke up to explosions, grabbed my sidearm and ran for the armory. Never made it. Enemy fighters had already breached the perimeter. I watched my spotter, Staff Sergeant James Rivera, get cut down trying to reach his weapon. Watched 6 others die in those first minutes. I survived by hiding under bodies, covered in their blood, useless." The group was silent, riveted and horrified. 7 dead total. Could have been prevented if I'd trusted my instincts, if I'd kept my rifle close, if I'd been ready. So I made a promise over James's body. Never again would I be separated from my weapon. Never again would I let someone convince me I was being paranoid when I knew danger was coming. She looked around at them. "That's why I sleep with my rifle. That's why I can't turn it off. Because 7 good soldiers died when I did. Silence that followed Maya's story was absolute. Even the distant sounds of damage control teams and medical evacuation helicopters seemed muted. Rodriguez stared at the ground, his earlier mockery now a source of deep shame. Kim had tears streaming down her face. Miller's jaw was clenched tight, understanding finally crystallizing into something profound. Lieutenant Webb spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. "Rivera, Staff Sergeant James Rivera. I knew him, we went through Ranger School together. He was a good man, one of the best." Maya nodded, a tear finally escaping down her dirt-streaked cheek. "He was my best friend. More than that, he was like a brother. We'd been through 3 deployments together. He trusted me to keep him safe from distance while he called my shots. I failed him." "You didn't fail him, Chen. The command failed you both by not listening." "Maybe, but I was the one who put my rifle in the armory that night. I was the one who decided to be normal for once. That decision cost 7 lives." Maya's hand tightened on her weapon. "This rifle, it's not the same one. That one was damaged in the attack, but I had this one custom built to the exact same specifications. Same weight, same balance, same feel. It's a memorial as much as a weapon." She pointed to a small engraving on the rifle's stock that no one had noticed before. In tiny letters it read, "For James and the Qadr 7, never unprepared." Rodriguez moved closer, reading the inscription. "Jesus, Sergeant, I'm so sorry for everything I said, for not understanding. You couldn't have known. Nobody here knew. And honestly, from the outside, I do look unstable. Sleeping with a weapon, constant hypervigilance, seeing threats everywhere, these are classic PTSD symptoms." Maya met his eyes. "The thing is, sometimes paranoia and preparation look identical. The only difference is whether the threat actually materializes." Corporal Kim wiped her eyes. "How do you live like that, always expecting the worst, always ready for violence?" "I don't know how to live any other way anymore," Maya admitted. "The therapists at Walter Reed tried to help me process the trauma, to reduce my hyperarousal responses. But every time I started to relax, every time I tried to let my guard down, I'd see James's face, hear his last words." She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "He said, 'Maya, help me.' And I couldn't. I was a sniper without a rifle, a guardian without the means to protect. Useless." Miller sat down heavily beside her. "So you made sure you'd never be useless again." "Exactly. I turned my trauma into training. Every nightmare became a scenario to plan for. Every flashback became a lesson in what not to do. I studied enemy tactics obsessively, memorized attack patterns, learned to read terrain and human behavior like others read books." Maya gestured toward the battlefield. "Everything that happened tonight, I'd rehearsed versions of it 1,000 times in my mind. When it finally came, I was ready because I'd never stopped preparing." Webb understood something crucial in that moment. You weren't seeing threats that didn't exist. You were seeing threats that hadn't manifested yet. There's a difference. "Yes, sir. Most people can't see the attack until it's happening. I see the conditions that precede an attack, the surveillance, the preparation, the behavioral changes. It's like watching a storm build on the horizon while everyone else insists the sky is clear." The sun had fully risen now, harsh light illuminating the carnage of the northern perimeter. The intelligence team was finishing their assessment. A sergeant approached with a preliminary report for Captain Holloway, who'd been standing nearby, listening to Maya's story. Holloway read the report, then addressed the group. "Intelligence found detailed maps on one of the Taliban commanders, maps of this entire FOB, including guard rotations, defensive positions, and weak points. They'd been planning this attack for at least 3 weeks. They knew our patterns better than we knew ourselves." He looked directly at Maya. "Except they didn't account for you. The one variable they couldn't predict was a soldier who never stopped watching them watch us." They also found evidence this was supposed to be a multi-FOB coordinated attack, the intelligence sergeant added. FOB Sentinel was the first target. If they'd succeeded here, they were going to hit 3 more installations in the region using the same tactics. The implications hung in the air. Maya's stand hadn't just saved Fob's Sentinel. It had potentially saved hundreds of soldiers across multiple bases by exposing and defeating the enemy's strategy. Rodriguez stood up, moving to stand at attention before Maya. "Sergeant Chen, I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're the most squared-away soldier I've ever served with, and I'm honored to be on your team." One by one, the others stood as well: Kim, Miller, Webb, even Captain Holloway. A spontaneous show of respect for a soldier who'd borne the weight of vigilance alone, who'd been mocked and doubted, yet had saved them all. Maya remained seated, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did my job." "Negative," Miller said firmly. "You did everyone's job. You saw what we missed, prepared when we slacked, and stood watch while we slept. That's not just doing your job, that's being the kind of soldier the rest of us aspire to be." The medical evacuation helicopter was landing now, coming to transport the 3 wounded defenders to better medical facilities. Maya watched it touch down, remembering another medevac helicopter 2 years ago that had carried away her fallen teammates. "James would be proud of you," Webb said quietly, following her gaze. "You honored his memory tonight. You saved lives the way you couldn't save his. That matters, Chen. That means something." Maya's throat tightened. "I hope so, sir. God, I hope so. Because I carry him with me every day. Every night I don't sleep, every moment I'm scanning for threats, every time I check my rifle one more time he's there. The Qadir 7 are always there." "Maybe that's not a burden," Kim suggested gently. "Maybe they're guardian angels, keeping you sharp, keeping you ready so you can protect others." It was a beautiful thought, one Maya had never considered. She'd always framed her hypervigilance as a curse, a wound that wouldn't heal. But perhaps it was also a gift, a painful gift, bought with blood and trauma, but a gift nonetheless. "The Army's going to want to debrief you extensively," Holloway said. "Your pattern recognition, your analytical methods, they'll want to incorporate this into training doctrine. What you did here needs to be taught, studied, replicated." Maya nodded slowly. "I'll help however I can, sir. If my experience can save others, if it can teach soldiers to see what I see." She trailed off, then continued. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe I survived Fob Qadir not because I deserved to, but because I needed to be here, needed to be ready for this night specifically." "Purpose from pain," Miller said. "I've seen it before. The soldiers who survive the worst often become the best protectors because they know exactly what they're protecting against." The team began to disperse slowly, returning to their various duties. There was damage to assess, defensive positions to reinforce, reports to file. But something fundamental had changed in how they viewed Maya Chen. She wasn't the strange new sniper anymore. She was the sentinel who'd saved them all, the soldier who'd turned personal tragedy into collective salvation, the warrior who carried her dead friends forward by keeping their living comrades alive. As the others left, Webb remained. "Chen, I need to ask, can you ever turn it off? The constant vigilance, the preparation, the inability to relax. Will you ever be able to just live normally?" Maya considered the question carefully, watching the sun continue its climb across the Afghan sky. "Honestly, sir, I don't think so. This is who I am now. The woman I was before Fob Qadir died that night along with James and the others. What survived was this version, harder, sharper, always watching, always ready." "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Maya admitted. "But it's also purposeful. I know my mission. I know my role. I'm the one who watches while others sleep, who sees danger while others dream, who stands ready when everyone else stands down." She finally managed a small, sad smile. "Not everyone can do it. Maybe not everyone should, but someone has to, and I've learned I'm good at it." Webb placed a hand on her shoulder, her non-bruised one. "The Army needs more soldiers like you, Chen. Not people who can shoot like you necessarily, though that's impressive, but people who have the moral courage to trust their instincts even when everyone doubts them. People who prepare for the worst while hopping for the best. People who refuse to be caught unprepared, no matter what others think. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. As Webb walked away, Maya sat alone with her rifle, watching the northern mountains where the enemy had retreated. They'd be back someday. Maybe not here, maybe not soon, but somewhere, somehow. The enemy was always coming back. But she'd be ready. She was always ready. Because 7 good soldiers had died when she wasn't, and she'd sworn on their graves that it would never happen again. Not on her watch. Not while she still drew breath and could pull a trigger. The rifle rested in her lap, cold metal warmed by her hands. It wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a promise kept, a memorial carried, and a shield protecting the living with lessons learned from the dead. Maya Chen had become the guardian she'd failed to be at Fob Kotir. And she would never stop standing watch. 3 weeks later, Fob Sentinel had transformed. The damage from the attack had been repaired, defensive positions reinforced, and sensor coverage expanded to eliminate the gaps Maya had identified. But the most significant changes weren't physical, they were cultural. The award ceremony was held in the open courtyard, with the entire company assembled. Captain Holloway stood at a makeshift podium, the American flag rippling behind him in the mountain breeze. Maya stood at attention, her rifle slung across her back. Even now, even during a formal ceremony, she wouldn't be separated from it. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen, Holloway's voice carried across the assembled soldiers, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life above and beyond the call of duty, you are hereby awarded the Silver Star, your second such decoration. He pinned the medal to her uniform. But more than that, you've changed how this entire FOB approaches defense. You've taught us that vigilance isn't paranoia, that preparation isn't fear, and that sometimes the soldier everyone thinks is crazy is actually the only one seeing clearly. The company erupted in applause. Rodriguez whistled. Kim wiped her eyes again. She'd become emotional every time Maya's actions were discussed. Sergeant Miller stood with his hand over his heart, pride evident on his face. But the ceremony was just formality. The real changes had been happening organically over the past 3 weeks. Maya had begun conducting informal training sessions, teaching soldiers her pattern recognition methods, how to read terrain not just tactically but analytically, how to spot the subtle signs of surveillance, how to identify changes in local behavior that might indicate impending violence, how to trust your instincts while verifying them with evidence. The sessions had started with just her platoon but had grown. Now soldiers from across the FOB attended, sitting in the dust while Maya drew diagrams, shared photographs, and explained the methodology that had saved their lives. Observation isn't just about seeing, she explained during one session, 30 soldiers listening intently. It's about noticing what's different. Humans are creatures of habit, villages even more so. When patterns change, traffic routes, market attendance, children's presence, there's always a reason. Your job is to figure out if that reason is benign or threatening. Corporal Kim had taken Maya's lessons furthest. She'd requested transfer to sniper training, determined to develop the same skills that had made Maya so effective. I want to be able to protect people the way you do, she'd told Maya. I want to see what you see. Maya had been touched and terrified in equal measure. Kim, be careful what you wish for. This ability comes with a cost. Once you start seeing threats everywhere, you can't unsee them. It changes you fundamentally. I know, Kim had replied. But after that night, I realized that staying comfortable is a luxury we don't have. Someone needs to watch. If not me, then who? The answer had reminded Maya so much of her own transformation that she'd immediately agreed to mentor Kim personally. Rodriguez had changed too. The jokes had stopped completely. He now kept a detailed journal of his observations during patrols, unusual vehicle placements, changes in civilian behavior, inconsistencies in local stories. He'd brought it to Maya weekly, asking her to review his assessments. Am I seeing threats that aren't there, or am I finally seeing what's actually there? He'd asked during their first review session. Maya had read through his observations carefully. Both, actually. Some of these are overreach, your pattern matching too aggressively, but these 3 entries here, these are legitimate concerns. You're learning to distinguish between the two. That's the hard part. Even the FOB's command structure had evolved. Captain Holloway had instituted what he called Chen protocols, a formalized system for reporting and investigating pattern-based threat assessments. No longer would soldiers' concerns be dismissed as paranoia. Every observation would be logged, analyzed, and cross-referenced. "We almost died because we didn't listen to you," Holloway had told Maya privately. "I won't make that mistake again, and I don't want any other commander in this theater making it either." Maya's methods were being written up as a case study for the Army's intelligence school. Her photographs, her timeline analysis, her tactical predictions, all of it was being packaged into a training module titled Pattern Recognition in Asymmetric Warfare, Lessons from FOB Sentinel. But perhaps the most meaningful change was the tradition that had started organically and had now become official: Chen Watch. Every night, one soldier volunteered for an extra duty shift specifically focused on long-term pattern observation. They would monitor the same areas Maya had watched, photograph the same terrain, document any changes. It wasn't about immediate threat response. That was the regular guard rotation's job. Chen Watch was about maintaining the kind of sustained, analytical vigilance that had saved the FOB. The volunteers wore it as a badge of honor. Being selected for Chen Watch meant you demonstrated the discipline, patience, and analytical mindset required for the role. It had become one of the most respected positions in the FOB's duty roster. On her final night at FOB Sentinel, she was rotating back to the States the next morning. Maya walked the northern perimeter one last time. She found Rodriguez on Chen Watch, sitting exactly where she'd been during the attack, photographing the ridgeline in the fading light. "Evening, Sergeant," he said, not taking his eye from the camera. "Just documenting the baseline. Want to make sure we catch any changes." Maya smiled. "See anything unusual?" "Negative. Everything matches the pattern from the past week. Shepherds using the normal routes. Village activity consistent. No scope glints, no unusual movement." He lowered the camera. "But I'm still watching, because the moment we stop watching is when they'll come back." "That's exactly right, Rodriguez. You've learned well." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the mountains that had nearly been the FOB's grave. Finally, Rodriguez spoke again. "Sergeant Chen, I need to say something. That first week, I thought you were the craziest person I'd ever met. Now I realize you were the sanest. You saw reality clearly while the rest of us were living in comfortable denial." "We all cope differently with the stress of war," Maya said gently. "Most soldiers need to believe they're safe to function. I need to believe I'm in danger to function. Neither approach is wrong, they're just different. But your approach kept us alive. This time, in a different situation, a different threat, maybe someone else's approach would be what saves everyone. The key is having diversity of thought, multiple perspectives, soldiers who see things differently." She gestured across the FOB. "Now you have that. Dozens of people trained to watch like I watch. The FOB doesn't need me anymore. It's got an entire network of sentinels." Sergeant Miller appeared, climbing up to their position. "Chen, there's something in the barracks you need to see." Curious, Maya followed him back to her quarters. The entire platoon was assembled there, standing around her bunk. When she entered, they came to attention. Lieutenant Webb stepped forward, holding a wooden plaque. "Sergeant Chen, we wanted to give you something before you leave. Something to remember us by, though I suspect you'll remember this deployment without any help." He turned the plaque so she could read it. "The Sentinel's Sentinel. Staff Sergeant Maya Chen. The soldier who never slept so others could wake. FOB Sentinel, Afghanistan. February 8, 2011. Enemy defeated, 50 plus KIA. Friendly casualties prevented, immeasurable. Vigilance saves lives. Below the text were photographs. Maya at her fighting position during the battle, taken by someone in the chaos. Her eye pressed to the scope, face a mask of concentration. A warrior in her element, doing what she was born to do. Maya's throat tightened. She tried to speak but couldn't. These soldiers who doubted her, questioned her sanity, mocked her obsessive preparation. They understood now. They saw her clearly. "There's more," Kim said softly. She held out a folded American flag. "This is the flag that flew over the FOB the night of the battle. We all signed it. We wanted you to have it." Maya unfolded it carefully. Every soldier who'd been at FOB Sentinel that night had signed their name, along with brief messages. "You saved my life, Rodriguez. Thank you for watching over us, Kim. Never doubted you for a second, okay, maybe a little, Miller. The guardian we needed, Webb." There were dozens more, each one a small testimony to what she'd done, who she'd become to them. Maya clutched the flag to her chest, finally letting the tears come. "Thank you, all of you. You gave me something I didn't have at FOB Cottier. You gave me a second chance to protect people, a chance to get it right." "You did more than get it right," Webb said. "You set a new standard for what right looks like." That night, Maya's last at FOB Sentinel, she did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She slept, truly slept, for 4 uninterrupted hours. Her rifle was still in her arms, and she was still fully dressed and ready, but for the first time since FOB Cottier, she allowed herself genuine rest. She dreamed of James Rivera, but in this dream he wasn't dying. He was smiling, giving her a thumbs up, saying the words she'd needed to hear for 2 years. "You did good, Maya. You finally did good. We can rest now." When she woke at 400 hours, her face was wet with tears, but something had shifted inside her. The weight she'd carried, the guilt, the shame, the desperate need to atone had lessened. Not disappeared, never disappeared, but become bearable. The next morning, Maya boarded the helicopter that would take her back to Bagram, then home to the States. As it lifted off, she looked down at FOB Sentinel one last time. On the northern wall, she could see the current Chen Watch volunteer at his post, scanning the ridgeline, maintaining the vigil. The FOB would be okay. They knew how to watch now. They'd learned what she'd learned through fire and blood, that vigilance wasn't paranoia, that preparation wasn't fear, and that the price of safety was eternal watchfulness. Maya settled back in her seat, her rifle across her lap, heading home. She was changed, scarred, shaped by trauma into something harder than she'd been. But she was also purposeful, validated, proven. The woman who slept holding her rifle wasn't crazy. She was the reason everyone else could sleep at all. And somewhere in the Afghan mountains, in a dozen FOBs across the theater, soldiers were learning to watch the way Maya Chen watched. Learning that the enemy never stopped planning, so someone on our side needed to never stop preparing. The legacy wasn't just saved lives. It was a new generation of sentinels standing watch in the darkness, rifles held close, eyes open wide, always ready. Always vigilant. Always remembering that freedom's guardians can never afford to sleep too
E lì
deeply.
sospeso
Because Maya Chen had taught them the
da 2
most
settimane.
important lesson of all. The
Ogni tanto
soldier
penso se farlo
everyone calls
ripartire,
crazy might
ma non è
just be
ancora
the
il
only one
momento.
seeing
Non ho ancora
clearly
tempo di
enough to save
giocarci.
them
Però è
all.
lì. Ti
The end.
piace Magnet? È bello? Ce l'ho lì pronto io. Non ho ancora deciso quando iniziarlo, ma ce l'ho già lì pronto. Non so se portarlo in stream, non lo so ancora. Un anno il sabato su 4 ore ne avevo 2 di educazione fisica. Sì che era bello. Madonna, sai che... Ma che... Oddio! Oddio, in realtà preferisco perdere delle ore durante la settimana con educazione fisica piuttosto che bruciarle al sabato per poi tornare in classe e dover fare delle ore. Oppure lo facevi dopo. Mm. No, io il sabato avevo tipo un'ora di italiano, un'ora di storia, avevo 2 ore con la stessa professoressa che era italiano e storia, e poi avevo 2 ore di forse matematica,
Indo
mi
è il
piaceva.